Actually, this conference started out as two funded day workshops, which we decided to combine into one virtual event today. So I want to start by thanking all the organizing committee members from the 3 participating faculties at the GUC. And these are the Faculty of Management Technology, represented by the Dean, Professor Ihab Kamel, who was very supportive of this initiative. Faculty of Civil Engineering, represented by Professor Mustafa Baraka and Professor Mahmoud Al-Khafif, who are kindly joining us today as speakers also at the event, and the Faculty of Applied Sciences and Arts, represented by Professor Zabina Miller, who was actually very supportive also of this initiative. So before we start, I just want to share a few thoughts here about the past year, 2020, as related to our virtual conference theme today. Now, despite public concern about 2020 as a year of ill omen, I have to say, especially with the advent of the COVID-19 virus and the associated global turmoil, the lockdown measures, the travel restrictions, the online education, and so on, yet if we contemplate so many good things related to management, innovation, design, and sustainability happened to humanity actually in the past 20 years, that would have otherwise made 2020 a year to celebrate. So I would like to share with you today some of the good landmarks of our time in the past 2 decades, based on a book I was just reading called 2020, 20 Years of Amazing Things That Have Changed Our World. So the most important landmarks landmark is, of course, technological advancements. So just to share a few examples, 2001 actually saw the release of Apple's portable music player, the iPod. So along with Apple's iTunes software, it had transformed the way people listen to music forever. And YouTube started in 2005. This also had educational implications on the global student community. The GPS system was commercialized in 2005. And imagine how that affected driving and the mobility experience on a global level. Also, Amazon Kindle ebook reader came onto market in 2007. The iPad was launched in 2010. How many applications do you have on your iPad today? Maybe even Zoom is one of them. Maybe you're joining us from your iPad today. Uber was also founded in 2009. Age of hashtags Black Lives Matter came as an important international movement that originated in 2013. We can think of others also relevant to the Middle Eastern context. Now, this does not mean that technological advancements were without cost, yet humanity is trying through a sound legal system and intellectual discourse like the one we're having today to mitigate the drawbacks of technology. So for example, LinkedIn was hacked actually in 2012 with the user passwords for nearly 6.5 million of its accounts stolen. Yet humanity learned, and we still have LinkedIn today. In 2010, after a major attack, Albert Gonzalez was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for masterminding the theft of 134 million credit cards. Yet humanity moved forward. So on the sustainability side, we are trying as the human community to build back greener. And I'm sure you've all heard this as we are in academia, and we actually talk on LinkedIn and share posts and so on, the idea of building back greener post-COVID-19. So for instance, with the jellyfish population soaring, Swedish researchers reported in 2010 that they have started extracting the jellyfish green fluorescent protein to create biofuel cells for nano devices. So at the same time, the past 20 years also saw the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001. They saw some political turmoil that occasionally did not end well in the Middle East, where we are actually, most of us, based here. Yet humanity also saw the Arab Spring, and actually being an Egyptian, the Egyptian Revolution of 2011, which we are reaping the benefits of till this very day. So I just want to end with a tribute to the past 20 years and a tribute to humanity building back greener. I look forward to actually the coming 20 years that would hopefully bring about more amazing innovations that are at the interface between management, design, and sustainability that would change our world to the better. Now, I hope you enjoy our program today, and I thank you all for joining from different parts of the world. Just a few logistical issues before we start with our session. I think my colleagues, Dr. Hagar Adib and Dr. Hadir Hamed, who are co-hosts of this and co-organizers of this event, have shared the agenda. And we want to try as much as possible to stick to the agenda. And also, we will have a Q&A session as per the agenda also after the first two sessions. If we finish the first session early, we can also have a Q&A session. And if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand on the Zoom. This would be actually a better way of handling this. And during the session, I ask also all participants to please mute themselves so that we don't distract the presenter. That's it. I think I'm going to hand over to Professor Mustafa Baraka and Professor Mahmoud Al-Khafif for their session.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Noah, for the introduction, and thank you for the view of 2020 years. Some of them are really motivating, especially to hear about the GPS going commercial. Actually, I did my PhD in the GPS in 1985, 88. So it was still a young kid on the block. Okay, so I'll share my screen with you. Okay, usually now we are rotating between WebEx, Zoom, and CBEX, so I want to make sure that my okay. This is the presentation, my presentation. Is it visible to everybody? Okay, thank you. Okay, my talk is about insight of Sustainable Development Goals, SDG Indicators using geoinformatics. I'll start first by speaking a little bit about the UN SDGs, because being the first to start, and there are some participants from junior researchers and people who would like to be knowledgeable a little bit about what's UN SDG and the indicators. It will not be comprehensive, just a big, quick overview. And then I'll speak a little bit about the geospatial data and geoinformatics, which is the core of my presentation. And then we'll end up by just few case studies about how geoinformatics is used in relation to SDG indicators, just to open the view for participants, especially junior researchers who are interested in looking for new areas and trends in dealing with the Sustainable Development Goals. First, about the UN SDG and indicators. We have 17 SDG indicators that came after the Millennium Development Goals. So since 2015, we have 17 SDGs with 169 targets and 232 global indicators. We are now official, and the indicators have methods and metadata that tells everybody how to compute this indicator specifically based on the data available at every state country. And every state country is committed, being members of the United Nations, to develop these SDGs at the national level and provide policies that are consistent with achieving the indicators. And every year, or sometimes biannual, there are conventions through the UN where presentations on the achievements are presented by state countries. And through the indicators, you can measure how each country is progressing in the respective 17 SDGs. Since the establishment of the SDGs in 2014, it was realized very much that besides data and the statistics, we need to display the data in a way that is related to the Earth. Okay, the location is very important for the data, and it makes more sense when you see the data at a specific location, understand the spatial relationship between the different data of the countries, and also we can go to more detailed levels, because actually the country goes, when start dealing with the SDG data, it goes at the city level, at the district level, and sometimes even building by building. So we have geospatial information at the base that's useful to bring the national data available, that helps the countries and the whole worldwide to track the achievements and the progress in the indicators reaching the 17 SDGs. Of course, started with 5 Ps about the planet, people, prosperity, peace, and partnership, and it moved to these indicators. And it's worth mentioning that the wheel and the colors and the icons are branded, and they have copyrights and they have usage regulations. So, yeah, something just to mention. And this is the way sometimes the indicators are presented. My understanding in this virtual conference, there will be more emphasis on the third indicator about the health, about the ninth indicator, industry, innovation, infrastructure, about the sustainable cities and communities, the SDG 11, and the SDG 12, the responsible consumption and production. Okay, to mention about geospatial data, actually geospatial data in terms of it handles any data that has to do with Earth activity, human kind activity, environment. It actually, spatial data can go through the whole thing. So it's not limited to these, of course, goals. Even though maybe for us on the engineering side, we focus more on the 9th and 11th indicators currently, if we are dealing just within the realm of engineering. However, it will be realized quite fast that the data that comes from geospatial data can contribute to all other indicators as well. Okay, so these 232 indicators have if you just put them like that, they are really, of course, overwhelming in terms of what they cover. And of interest is just to mention the status right now. Okay, the green indicators have global official metrics. The indicators are metrics of measuring how the SDG, specific SDG, is achieved. So this metric through the computing indicators, the green indicates that it has a global official metric available, and the data is easily collected and compiled through the countries. The orange indicates that the official metrics are not yet there completely, and the data is on the average, there is not too much data currently. And then the final is where there are some lag in terms of the indicators how to be globally achieved. It's not to say that there is no indicator, but there is no global consensus on the indicator how to be computed. We have our, for example, here the 11th SDG goal. We have the same thing, so some lagging, and actually where there is lag here, the geospatial data can contribute better. So towards the end of my presentation, there is 1 or 2 cases that address the public transportation access and can display data more in a more effective way. Okay, just before going into the presentation, let me just give a quick overview of what's meant by geospatial data. Geospatial data is data that has so there are too many indicators. Okay, so geospatial data is data distributed all over the space. The space for us here for the UNSDG is the Earth. And when you are dealing with geospatial data, you want to know the location of this data specifically on the Earth. And the more accurate, the better. Actually, it was mentioned now, GPS now can provide you a wide range of position. If you have a mobile phone, it can give you maybe a few meters of your location, but you can go actually to the millimeter level, or you can go to the meter level. So you can get location instant for all the data that you're collecting, either by looking at latitude and longitude, or by east and north, or something geographic that will attach the data to a specific location. And then once this data is collected, it is taken, processed, assessed, and stored, categorized, and used for modeling and processing, so that you can analyze the data. Once you start processing the data, then you are extracting useful information from it. And since it is data about the Earth, so we have geoinformatics, where we are using the data within in presence of technologies, computer processing, and other technological collecting platforms that we can get the data through, and then this data can be used in relation to the SDGs. So we have geospatial data related to the locations of the Earth, very important because it makes more sense. And the geoinformatics converts this data into meaningful, categorized, processed information that can give you more insight into the data that you have collected. The UN has, since the establishment of 2015 goals, has specific entities, committees that dedicate all their effort to handling geospatial data. We have UNGGIM, which is the United Nations Committee on Global Geospatial Information. It convenes every year, and through the sessions, the countries has a chance to present their status of data collection, sometimes also to exchange guidelines and advice about how geospatial data is collected. And the nice thing is that these committees contain all experts from all social, economic, engineering, and otherwise. So actually, it's not restricted as an engineering, because it darkens the whole 17 goals of the UNSC. I'd like just to read a statement here that was accompanying the activities of this committee, where it states clearly that sustainable development can be analyzed, mapped, and discussed and modeled within a geographic context. So once you have data related to location, you can address the sustainable development in many aspects, and that these sources of data can be satellite images, it can be GPS data, it can be actual direct measurements from sensors on the Earth. And once you have that, then the geography can provide what we call the integrative framework. Okay, we need to integrate all the data collected over the Earth from different countries into a global scene where decisions can be made at the global level. Also, the UN different committees have committed to the use of geospatial data for different types of SDGs and activities in their mandates. The Security Council, the UN Operation for Crisis Center, the UN Peace Corps, the member states, the UN agency funding and programs, all have mandates that include geospatial information to be part of their decisions and workflow. The UN, to make things easier for collecting the data, has asked the state countries to collect the data in disaggregated fashion in terms of maybe gender, age, ethnicity, and I have here geospatial data because it has been emphasized, especially in the last 2 years, that the more data is collected in terms of and with a location, whether it's urban or rural, assigned to a specific district or city or neighborhood, the more meaningful this data can be. So the data collected all across the indicators is categorized or aggregated by, as I said, gender, age, ethnicity, and geospatial as well. Some examples of the different goals, just highlighting very quickly the data here. For example, goal of end poverty, you can see right away there's a poverty map to go down. For example, with the goal 3, our goal health facility maps, and in this instance, of course, we see a lot of COVID-19 risk maps and status maps through. Most of these data is collected and then assigned or related to locations. So we're looking at geospatial data through classical maps, sometimes images, and then going down to the global 9 SDG, access to infrastructure, again, road maps, the public transportation, mobility maps, and so on. And the list goes on into the other SDG goals. For example, here we see the goal 11 about public access to green space and transportation, and so on and so forth. So the geospatial data is now part of the fabric of the SDGs goal, with an official backup from the UN and UNGGIM being the core committee for it. Okay, so the second part of my presentation is about the geospatial data and geoinformatics. I gave earlier definition just to remind you that we're looking for data and we are switching this data as we are collecting it with location, latitude, longitude, or east to north. And there will be other presentation here how to relate the data to location, maybe in a more intuitive sense. And then this data is processed and categorized in ways that can give information for decision makers and states of the development. Here again, the sustainable goals, you can look under the sustainable goals. There are some specific mandates to have what's called global geodetic reference frames, that all the data, every country has its own location system, but it's required here to have a global location system that everybody can relate to. The GPS provides that very nicely. Geographic names, there have to be definite names. The database should be able to really recover this name, the spelling of the name. There are transliteration, how to write up Arabic name, English name, other languages in a way that can be stored and recovered from the database. The addresses, there has to be consistency. The functional areas in terms of boundaries of districts, of cities and countries have to be well defined in location. Specific aggregates like the buildings and settlements also have to be well defined in terms of location, land parcel ownership, transportation networks, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of specific. Maybe before just moving further into the presentation, I'd like to emphasize why I'm bringing this specific item into the conference. Geospatial data has users that span the whole interest, and you don't need to be an engineer or a geographer to handle spatial data, because location is intuitive and it can be collected quite easy. The issue is what data to collect. So if you are a social scientist from economic point of view, from the environment, you have to know what data need to be collected and assessed, and then assigning the location to it is a matter of a straightforward process that I think currently it can be done very easily. So the idea here is to present the trend that's going in with collecting the data for the SDGs goals, that if you connect this data with location, you can get a better insight at the data, you can get a bit better display understanding of this data, and you can integrate it with other data more easily. Okay, in our university in engineering, we teach our students how to collect this data in terms of various scales, at the macro scale, at the micro scale, at the meso scale. So you can start maybe doing direct measurements on the ground or from the air. You can do scanning. You can use GPS for collecting data from aerial photos, from remote sensing. So these are tools that part of the geospatial community is aware of. Others, once you collect this data, you can start including data that, of course, of non-engineering nature. For example, application of geospatial data in detecting fraud and abuse of information in retail, in financial service, in healthcare assessment, energy, disaster, defense, intelligence, infrastructure assessment. So these are all domains for geospatial data, and also they are all domains for the SDGs. So if you have interest in one of these areas, coupling it with location, then you can start getting these type of displays. And it's not just maps. You can get maps, you can get 3D representations of the data and the features. You can do simulations. You can do what if situation. Once you have special data put within a geoinformatics database, then you can start exploring more the data at hand. As I said, the data, the geospatial data is assigned locations at the building and the very detailed level, street by street, put into district level, and then aggregated into cities and countries, and then the countries are aggregated into global data. So the data has a direct, straightforward flow that is mandated and maintained by all countries. So actually, any data you can look at it at the global level or the regional level continents or by country or by specific location. So you can have different views of different scales of the data, because you can zoom in and zoom out, and you can see different relations between the data and the different scales. This is also another advantage. And as I said, the DGGIM has an annual convention meeting, and one of the meetings in 2018, there was a very clear drive that all the census that are done in all countries should start using geospatial enabler in it. And Egypt, among other countries, have adopted what was known as grid-based system, where the whole country is divided into a regular grid by letters. For example, here we have LG, which is deep carrier. So it's the dimensions of this grid is 100 by 100 kilometers. So it's of course aggregate, it will give you indicators. However, you take this aggregate 100 by 100 divide it again 10 by 10. So you have more detailed locations in where the data is collected, and then you take this 10 by 10 kilometer divided again kilometer by kilometer. So you get specific, and as you are doing that, you're getting a code. So the location for the data that you have collected will be LG7246, LG being this part, and 72 within LG this location, and within this 7246 will be this location. And then it goes beyond. It doesn't stop at the 1 kilometer. Actually, it goes up to about 100 meters or better. So we did our census at the time that was done in 2017, adopted this system. And actually, I have in my pocket, but I won't show it, the card that tells you about your building, your location. You can see SG7246, so you can know the location. And it's just the location. It tells you something more about the type of the building, whether it's residential, industrial, mills, and so on. So you have more thematic understanding, and then it positions the location here within a street grid, and that's within the district and the city. So the data is collected in very high granular details, and is again aggregated into geospatial database. Okay, this is a display. Each, among other countries, have now what they call geoportals, where they display different governance and assessments of the data. For example, this is a display about the health facilities in relation to the population of the inhabitants in the Port Said district. Okay, it has the services, different types of hospitals, clinics, and so on. And then the population, of course, the population can be aggregated or disaggregated in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, disabilities, and so on. When you take this data in the builds and collect it with other data layers like street networks and agricultural land use registration, you start getting integrated data that I said is what the geoinformatics uses in order to derive and look at the indicators. And you can do as much as you want in terms of collecting data. There are imagery, so you can choose satellite images, aerial images, maps of different themes, networks, transportation, utilities, the address, the boundaries, district boundaries, as things about the environment, the water features, and there are some controls. You can add even your own very specific data, and you can integrate them all into what's called geoinformation or geoinformatics, or sometimes the more popular name comes known as GIS. Again, the view here from the UN, you have a lot of data sources that you can use. You can integrate all together. You can divide this data by themes, social, economic, environment. But the more layers they include, the more rich the data, the more insight that you can get from, and also the more SDG goals that you can address. And these data sets are now available. There are global data sets, of course, at the level of maybe 100 kilometers. And then there are national data sets at grids of maybe 1 by 1 kilometer. And in some countries more than others have more defined and granular data, but this data is very fundamental in tracking indicators of the SDG, as well as, of course, other mandates for the country. For example, here, I'd like just to mention that the data is not just for the SDG, that all countries are required to establish what's called national spatial data infrastructure. So we now have what's called a digital infrastructure, where the whole country has all its information, the infrastructure about the road, the buildings, the habitat, the environment, the land use, everything is compiled in one national spatial data infrastructure. And this NSDI is actually part of a larger data set that will serve for the SDGs. Okay, the last part of my presentation is about some case studies. I will not go deep into that, but there are like 2 or 3 case studies I just highlight. One is really, yes, and this is what really brought the title into my mind about some of the indicators that we used automatically after being officially adopted. Like, for example, here we have SDG target 11 about cities, and the 11.2, which has to do the accessibility of public to public transportation. Accessibility of public transportation. There is a way of computing the indicator. Okay, the indicator is computed by seeing the population with convenient access, how many people have a convenient access in relation to the city population. For example, if you are assessing a neighborhood or a city, let's say Cairo. Of course, Cairo is a great example, but only a big one. But you see the total population, and then you look at public access, the bus stations, and public transportation, and you see the percentage of public transportation available and how much it covers in terms of the total population. This was a case study that was done through research, and this was how the indicator was computed. We have here service area for public transport. The case is from Bogota, from Colombia, South America, and it shows here in terms of color indication after collecting the geospatial data. The colors here are the income categories of the population within Bogota. The red is maybe under the poverty line, and orange, and then you have something at the poverty line and higher, maybe higher income strata. And then the coloring here also, beside the coloring, you can see some gaps, few gaps here, okay, where it indicates that there is no public transportation available. If you look at this way of computing the indicator, 11.2 indicator, public access, population access to public transportation, the statistics coming from this data and the display indicates maybe that it covers about 80 to 90% of the population, which is really good. So it looks like Bogota population or inhabitants are enjoying good public transportation system. The critique here that's being done is that let's look at it at another way where the geospatial data can give you more insight. And here the data is again computed, and the idea is to look at the density of the bus stops as being public transportation in relation to the population. Okay, and if you look at that, if you start looking how many bus stops within per kilometer, you see that there are now more red zones that indicates that there is not enough bus stops to address the needs of the population in these areas. And suddenly the indicator that gave us like 80 or 90% drops to about 60 or 70%. So again, if you can play around and you can start to introducing different layers and concepts. It's just easy to in relation or in presence of geospatial data to compute the density of the bus stops and the density and population. You can start getting more insight indicators, and maybe this paper was calling for a review or a better way of computing the indicator that relies here on the public consultation, because here it looks if you are living within 500 meters square, if there is a bus stop, and that's it. If it's 1 or 10, it doesn't matter. It will give you a rating of good. But here, it starts looking at the number of bus stops per 500 kilometers, and suddenly there are more critical cases that appear. This is one thing. Other cases, here a case from Germany about going into renewable energy, especially wind power, and looking for feasibility locations where it would make sense and it would make good economic and also engineering meeting these criteria for location for other wind power within the city. Another case here from Poland about the density of the buildings within different zones. Okay, Okay, you have here the legend where there are vacancies for buildings, where the percentage increase to something critical because you don't want to fill the whole land with buildings, but you need something of a reasonable percentage of land use. So here, this is an assessment. Another final assessment here is looking at the city in terms of different types of buildings, urban spaces, and extensions, where there are residential areas and critical in terms of density. There are less areas. The case here is from Portugal, and this is at the district level, and then you go at the city level, and then you go at the national level. So you can see, you can start looking in terms of geospatial data and indicators at very fine details, and then you can generalize, you can do thematic mapping for the different cities, and then once you cluster them, you can get some indicators for the whole country. I think this concludes my presentation. I hope I was within the time, and let me just conclude here with some conclusions. Okay, one, that geospatial data is a valuable resource for monitoring the agenda of 2030 for sustainable development. The second conclusion is that geoinformation can enhance, and it has enhanced a lot for people looking at the SDG indicators at the global level, and of course more at the local level, which is really what makes the difference, because the data at the local level really what affects the inhabitants at the different locations, so you can use geospatial information more effectively. The last two goals is that there are standards for geospatial framework where you can include also socio-economic information, so it can be integrated easily because the network, the frame, the geometry where the location can be compiled is ready and can include socio-economic information. But of course, from my background, not being in the socio-economic background, the data and the value of it and what's needed would be from the specialists in this area. However, the frame, the geospatial framework, we can assist in that. And finally, there is an ongoing, very hard drive to promote the geospatial data and geoinformatics for analysis through the UN committees, through the funding agencies of the UN. There is quite a drive and capacity build up to take these geospatial tools and informatics more into the hand of the researchers and to provide more analysis for other indicators beside the indicators that I have shown. Okay, thank you very much. These are my references for presentation. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mustafa.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Great.
And I think we have time for some questions. We can stop the screen share and kind of entertain the question.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I opened the chat.
I don't see any hands raised, but
yeah.
I would like to ask a question. I think this is a very essential perspective that from management point of view, we do not necessarily have for how the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Agenda can move forward. My question is these layers. Okay, so you showed, for example, that there are specific colors for every SDG.
Yes.
Is there any publicly available data about all the SDGs together, aggregated, that you can aggregate or disaggregate, like together in one location? For example, let's say Egypt, for example, is there public available data for that? Like a map that includes the layers of the SDGs?
Yes, I think they are keeping, the final aggregation is at the SDG level. So it's SDG 1 poverty or 11, they don't integrate the whole 17 together. But
so yeah, they are separately. So I cannot have, for example, a location that separately. Okay.
Yeah, but still, having a country at the base, you can bring in the data, for example, for the SDG 3 and 11, and you can look at them, and you can start, if you understand about the data itself, you can integrate the data together and come up with maybe some insight of these data.
Okay, but there is no data that includes, for example, for a particular location, how different SDGs are performing.
Oh, there are. I mean, yeah, all the countries report year by year, and since 2017, they are reporting more into in terms of geospatial data maps that gives you for every country how the indicators are achieved. Okay, so the data is there. Actually, if you go at the UN, and maybe after the conference, I can dig it up from my references. There are what's called metadata that describe what are the indicators. And then there are data for some countries that are available publicly free, and some countries don't publish all the data. So there are some SDG data for countries, and it depends really on the policy of each country in terms of the data sharing. So there are data for SDGs for many countries, and for Egypt I think there are some for health indicators. It's one of the popular things. In the infrastructure also there are some SDG data in geospatial presentation. One good source for these data is the Census Bureau here, the CAPMAS. It's called the Central Authority for Population. The CAPMAS. Yeah, it has a lot of data now. All the census is compiled, as I said, with the location, so they can give you data in terms of location maps or Excel sheet with locations available as well.